Your Invisible Power, Genevieve Behrend. Ask and it will be given to you, Matthew 7:7. Preface. These pages were written with the purpose and hope that their suggestions may provide you with the key that will unlock the path to making your wishes come true, and to explain to you that fear should be banished entirely from your efforts to obtain possession of the things you desire. This presupposes, of course, that your desire for possession is based on your aspiration for greater freedom. You feel, for example, that the possession of more money, land, or friends will make you happier, and your desire to possess these things arises from the conviction that possessing them will give you freedom and happiness. In your effort to possess, you will discover that what you need most is to always not intermittently be your best self, that self that understands that the mistakes of your loved ones are simply mistakes. Your feeling that having more possessions of any kind will give you satisfaction and happiness is mistaken. No person, place, or thing can give you happiness. They may give you a reason for happiness and a sense of contentment, but the joy of living comes from within. Therefore, you are here recommended to make the effort to obtain those things that you believe will give you joy, and nothing else, as long as we said before, your desires are in accord with the joy of living. This volume also aims to suggest the possibilities that await those who make a persistent effort to understand the law of visualization and make practical application of this knowledge on their current plane. The word effort, as used here, is not intended to convey the idea of tension. All studies and meditations should be performed without tension or stress. I have attempted to show that if one begins from the beginning of creative action or mental image, certain corresponding results are guaranteed to follow. Although the laws of the universe cannot be modified, they can be made to work under specific conditions, producing results for individual advancement that cannot be obtained under the spontaneous operation of law provided by nature. However far removed from your past experiences the suggestions I've given you about the possibilities that await you when you visualize may be, they in no way break the continuity of the law of cause and effect. If, through the suggestions given here, someone comes to realize that his mind is the center through which, and in which, all the power there is operates, and that it is simply waiting to be told the only way in which it can perform a specific action, and this means reaction in a concrete or physical form, then this book will have fulfilled its mission. Try to remember that the image you think, feel, and see is reflected in the mind universal, and that, by the natural law of reciprocal action, must return to you in a spiritual or physical form. Knowledge of this law of reciprocal action between the individual and the universal mind gives you free access to everything you wish to possess or be. It must be firmly kept in mind that all this can only be true for the person who recognizes his or her power to create a permanent mental image, comes from the universal spirit of life that creates everything God, and that can be used in a constructive way, only if it is used and retained in harmony with the nature of the spirit that created it. To ensure this, there must be no reversal of the person's thinking about his relationship with this spirit universal creator, which is that of a son or daughter, through which the mind of the Father acts and reacts. Conditioned in this way, whatever you think or feel you are, will be faithfully reproduced by the creative spirit of life in a reaction corresponding. This is the main reason why you should imagine yourself and to your affairs as you want them to be, as existing realities, even if they are invisible to the physical eye, and live within your image. An honest effort to make this, always recognizing that your mind is a projection of the creative spirit, you will show that the best that exists is yours, in all your ways. Genevieve Behrend, September 1921. Chapter 1. The Order of the Display. Exercising the faculty of visualization keeps your mind in order and attracts things to you. The things you need to make your life more enjoyable in an orderly way. If you train yourself in the practice of deliberately imagining your desire and examining it carefully, you will soon discover that your thoughts and desires come and go, develop in a more orderly way than before. When you have reached a state of an orderly mindset, you are no longer in a continuous state of mental haste. Hasted is fear, and consequently, it is destructive. In other words, when your understanding comprehends the power that is in the act of visualizing what your heart desires, and holding it with your will, then attracts it towards you, you have everything necessary for the realization of that image through the harmonious vibrations of the law of attraction. You realize that since order is the first law of heaven, and visualization places things in their natural element, then visualization must be something heavenly. Everyone visualizes, whether they know they do or not. Visualizing is the great secret of success. The conscious use of this great power attracts resources to you, greatly multiplied, intensifies your wisdom, and allows you to make use of advantages that you were previously unable to recognize. Now we can fly through the air, not because someone has been able to change the laws of nature, but because the inventor of the flying machine learned to apply the laws of nature, and making orderly use of them, produced the desired result. So far as natural forces are concerned, nothing has changed from the beginning. In year one there were no airplanes, because those of that generation could not conceive of that idea as a feasible practical possibility. It hasn't been done yet, was the argument, and it can't be done. However, the laws and materials for practical flying machines existed before just as exist now. Troward tells us that the great lesson he learned from the airplane and telegraphy wireless is the triumph of principle over precedent, and working an idea to the point its logical conclusion, despite the accumulated testimonies of all experiences previous. Having such an example before you, don't you realize that even bigger secrets can be revealed, and that, in addition, you have within you the key that opens the secret chamber that contains what you most desire? The only thing necessary for you to be able to using that key and making your life exactly the way you want it to be is a careful investigation of the invisible causes behind all states, external and visible. Then you must bring these invisible causes into harmony with your ideas, and you will discover that you can turn possibilities that currently seem like fantastic dreams into practical, workable realities. We all know that the balloon was the predecessor of the airplane. In 1766, Henry Cavendish, an English nobleman, demonstrated that hydrogen gas was 7 times lighter than atmospheric air. From this discovery, the balloon was created, and from the ordinary balloon, the dirigible, a cigar-shaped aerostat, was developed. The study of aeronautics and the laws of aerial locomotion of birds and projectiles led to the belief that a mechanism could be developed by which heavier than air machines could travel from one place to another and remain in the air at a speed that overcame the law of gravity through propulsive force. Many mocked Professor Langley of Washington, who developed much of a theory later improved upon by others, when he got a model airplane airborne only to plunge its nose into the muddy waters of the Potomac. But the Wright brothers, conducting experiments in the late 19th century, saw the possibility of air travel in a machine that had no gas bags. They saw themselves enjoying this form of transportation with great ease. It is said that one brother would say to the other, when their various experiments did not go as they had hoped, "That's all right, brother. I can see myself riding in that machine, traveling easily and steadily." These Wright brothers knew what they wanted and kept their images constantly before them. By visualizing or creating a mental image, you are not seeking to change the laws of nature. You are complying with them. Your objective in visualizing is to bring things back into normal order, both mentally and physically. When you realize that this method of employing your creative power involves the practical, material realization of the things you desire, one after another, your confidence in the mysterious but infallible law of attraction, which has its central station of power in the very heart of your word image, becomes supreme. Nothing can shake it. You never feel it necessary to take anything away from anyone. You have learned that asking and seeking are correlated with receiving and finding. You know that all you have to do is to get the plastic substance of the universe to begin flowing into the thought molds your desire image offers. Chapter 2. how to attract the things you want. The power within you that enables you to form a mental image is the starting point of all that exists. In its original state, it is the undifferentiated, formless substance of life. Your mental image forms the mold, so to speak, in which this formless substance will take shape. Visualizing or mentally seeing things and conditions just as you wish them to be is the condensing, specializing power within you, which could be illustrated as the lens of a projector. The projector is one of the best symbols of this faculty of imagining. It illustrates the workings of the creative spirit on the plane of initiative and selection, or in its concentrated, specializing form most clearly. This slide of an image illustrates your own mental image, invisible on the projector of your mind until you turn on the light of your will. That is, you turn on your desire with absolute faith that the creative spirit of life within you is doing the work. Through the continuous flow of the light of will into the spirit, the desired image is projected onto the screen of the physical world, an exact reproduction of the slide in your mind. Visualizing without a sufficiently stable will to inhibit all thoughts and feelings contrary to your image would be as useless as using a projector that doesn't have a light. On the other hand, if your will is sufficiently developed to hold your image in thought and feeling without any what-ifs, but simply realizing that your thought is the great attracting power, then your mental image will be projected onto the screen of your physical world as surely as any slide placed in the finest projector ever made. Try projecting an image on a projector that has a light that continually moves back and forth, and you will have the effect of a wavering will. It is just as necessary for you to always stand behind your image with a strong, steady will as it is to have a strong, steady light on a projector. The joyful certainty with which you create your image is the exceedingly powerful magnet of faith, and nothing can destroy it. You are happier than ever because you now know where your source of supply is, and you trust its sure response to your promptings. The important thing to remember is that what every human being desires is happiness, and the study of visualization allows you to get more out of life than you've ever had before. More and more possibilities open up for you. A businessman once told me that since he had been practicing visualization and had acquired the habit of spending a few minutes each day thinking about his work as he wished it to be, in a large and sweeping way, his business had more than doubled in 6 months. His method was to go into a room each morning before breakfast and take a mental inventory of his business as he had left it the night before, and then dwell on it. He said he expanded and expanded in this way until his affairs were in a remarkably successful state. He pictured himself in his office doing everything he wanted done. His occupation required him to meet with many strangers every day. In his mental picture, he saw himself meeting these people, understanding their needs, and providing them with exactly what they wanted. This habit, he said, had strengthened and steadied his will in an almost inconceivable way. Moreover, by mentally seeing things just as he wished them to be, he had acquired the confident feeling that some creative power was being exercised for and through him for the purpose of improving his little world. When you begin to visualize seriously, you may feel, like many others, that someone else could be making the same image as you, and naturally, that would not be suitable for your purpose. Don't worry about this, unless you need to. Simply try to realize that your image is an orderly exercise of the universal creative power applied in a specific way. Then you can be sure that no one can work in opposition to you. The universal law of harmony prevents this. Try to keep in mind that your mental image is the universal mind specifically exercising its inherent powers of initiative and selection. God, or the universal mind, created man with the special purpose of differentiating himself through him. Everything that exists came into being in the same way, through this same law of self-differentiation, and for the same purpose. First, there was the idea, the mental image, or prototype of the thing, which is the thing itself in its incipient or plastic form. The great architect of the universe contemplated himself manifesting through his polar opposite, matter, and the idea expanded and projected until we had one world, many worlds. Many people ask, but why must we have a physical world? The answer is, because it is in the nature of creative substance to solidify, under direction rather than activity, just as it is in the nature of wax to harden when cooled, or of plaster to become firm and solid when exposed to air. Your image in this same divine substance, in its fluid state, takes form through the individualized center of divine operation, your mind. And there is no power to prevent this combination of spiritual substance from becoming physical form. It is in the nature of spirit to do its work, and an idea is not realized until it has created a vehicle for itself. Nothing can prevent your image from taking concrete form, except the very power that gave it life, you. Suppose you want to have a tidier room. You look at your bedroom, and the idea of order suggests boxes, closets, shelves, hangers, and so on. The box, the closet, the hangers. All of these are concrete ideas of order. They are vehicles through which order and harmony are suggested. Chapter 3. The relationship between mental form and physical form. Some people feel that it is not entirely correct to visualize things. It's too material a thing, they say. But material form is necessary for the spirit's self-recognition from the individual point of view. And this is the medium through which the creative process is carried out. Therefore, matter, far from being an illusion and something that should not exist, as some metaphysical teachers teach, is the necessary channel for the spirit's self-differentiation. But I have no intention of leading you through long and tiresome scientific reasoning to eliminate the mystery of visualization and place it on a logical basis. Naturally, each person will do this in their own way. My only desire is to show you the easiest way I know, which is the path Troward leads me along. I am sure you will come to the conclusion, as I have, that the only mystery in connection with visualization is the mystery of life taking form, governed by unalterable and easily understood laws. We all possess more power and greater possibilities than we realize. Visualization is one of the greatest powers and allows us to see other possibilities. When we stop to think for a moment, we realize that for the cosmos to exist, it must be the result of a cosmic mind, which unites all individual minds to certain generic units of action, thus producing all things as realities and none as illusions. If you take this thought from Troward and meditate on it without prejudice, you will undoubtedly realize that concrete material form is an absolute necessity of the creative process, and furthermore, that matter is not an illusion, but a necessary channel through which life differentiates itself. If you consider matter in its proper order as the polar opposite of spirit, you will find no antagonism between them. On the contrary, together they constitute a harmonious whole. And, when you realize this, you feel that in your visualization practice, you are working from cause and effect, from beginning to end. In reality, your mental image is the specialized work of the creative spirit. One could talk for hours based on purely scientific facts, showing, as Troward says, that the raw material for the formation of solar systems is universally distributed throughout space. However, research shows that, although the heavens are studded with millions of suns, there are spaces that give no sign of cosmic activity. If this is true, there must be something that initiated cosmic activity in certain places, while it bypassed others where raw material was also available. Without much thought, one could attribute the development of cosmic energy to a medium that is uniformly distributed throughout space, because all its particles are in equilibrium, and therefore no particle possesses in itself a greater power to originate motion than the others. Thus we find that the initial movement, although working in and through the particles of the original substance, does not originate from the particles themselves. It is that something we refer to when we speak of spirit. The same power that brought the universal substance into existence will bring your individual thought or mental image into physical form. There is no difference in the type of power. The only difference is a difference of scale. Power and substance are the same. Only as you develop your mental image, it transfers its creative energy from the universal to the scale of the particular, and it works in the same unerring way from its specific center, your mind. Chapter 4. How your mental image works. We could use the operation of a large telephone system as a simile. The main exchange is subdivided into many branches. Each branch is in direct connection with its source, and each individual branch, recognizing the source of its existence, reports everything back to the exchange. Therefore, when help of any kind is required, new supplies, difficult repairs, or any number of other things, the branch in need immediately goes to its exchange. It wouldn't occur to them to refer their difficulties or their successes to the main exchange of a telegraph system, even if they belong to the same organization. These different branch exchanges know that the only solution to any difficulty must come from the exchange from which they were designed. If we, as individual branches of the universal mind, would refer our difficulties with this same confidence to the source from which we were projected and use the solutions provided, we would realize what Jesus meant when he said, "Ask and you shall receive." We would all receive our equipment. Surely the Father must provide for his child. The trunk of the tree cannot fail to provide the means of life for its branches. All animate and inanimate things are called into existence, or into existence by a power that does not itself emerge. The power that creates the mental image, the substance of the creative spirit of your imagined desire, does not emerge. It projects the substance of itself, which is a solidified equivalent of itself, while remaining invisible to the physical eye. Only those people who are able to understand what Paul meant when he said, "The worlds were created by the word of God." The things that are seen are not made of things that appear, will appreciate the value of visualizing. There is nothing strange or mysterious about the idea of your imagined desire becoming material evidence. That is the operation of a universal natural law. The world was projected by the universal mind's contemplation of itself, and this same action is taking place in its individualized branch, which is the mind of man. Everything in the entire world begins in the mind and comes into existence in exactly the same way, from the hat on your head to the boots on your feet. All those things are projected, solidified thoughts. Your personal advancement in evolution depends on your correct use of the power of visualization, and your use of it depends on your recognition that you, yourself, are a particular center through which, and in which, the creative spirit is finding new expression for the potentialities that already exist within it. This is evolution, this continual unfolding of existing thoughts through externally invisible things. Your mental image is the attractive force that evolves and blends the original substance, giving it a specific form. Your image is the blending and evolving powerhouse, so to speak, through which the creative spirit expresses itself. Its creative action is unlimited, it has no beginning, and no end, and is always progressive and orderly. It develops stage by stage, each stage being a necessary preparation for the next. Now, let's see if we can get an idea of the different stages through which things in the world come into existence. Troward says, if we can find out what the principle at work is that is producing these results, we can very quickly and easily give it a personal application. First, we see that the thought of life, or the creative spirit upon itself, is its simple consciousness of its own being, and this produced a first ether, a universal substance out of which everything in the world grows. Troward also tells us that although this awareness of being is a necessary basis for any other possibility, there isn't much to be said about it. The same is true of the individualized spirit, which is you. Before you consider the idea of creating a mental image of your desire as practical, you must have some idea of your being, your I am. As soon as you become aware of your being, you begin to enjoy the freedom this awareness suggests. You want to do more and more, and as you realize your desire within, The localized spirit initiates conscious activities within you. What interests you most is the specific action of the creative spirit of life, the specialized universal mind. The germ of God located within you is your personality, your individuality, and since the bliss of absolute freedom is the inherent nature of this germ of God, it is natural that it seeks to enjoy itself through its specific center. And when your understanding grows that your being, your individuality, is God particularizing Himself, you naturally develop divine tendencies. You want to enjoy life and freedom. You want freedom in your affairs, as well as in your conscience, and it is natural that this should be so. With this progressive desire, there is always a blurred thought image. As your desire and recognition develop into an intense desire, that desire becomes a clear mental image. For example, a girl studying music wants a piano so she can practice at home. She desires the piano so strongly that she can mentally see it in one of the rooms. She maintains the image of the piano and mentally reflects on the pleasure and advantages of having a piano in a corner of the living room. One day, she finds it there, just as she had imagined. As your understanding of who you are, where you come from, what your purpose is, and how you are going to fulfill the purpose for which you exist grows, you will increasingly allow yourself a center through which the creative spirit of life can enjoy itself. And you will realize that there can only be one creative process that fills all space, which is the same in its potentiality, whether universal or individual. Furthermore, everything that exists, whether on the visible or invisible planes, had its origin in the localized action of thought or a mental image, and that includes you, because you are localized universal spirit, and the same creative action is taking place through you. Now, you're no doubt wondering why there is so much sickness and misery in the world. If the same power and intelligence that created the world is at work in the mind of man, why doesn't it manifest as strength, joy, health, and abundance? If one can make one's desires come true simply by creating a mental image of the desire, grasping it with one's will, and pursuing it without anxiety on the external plane, or doing whatever it takes to bring that desire to fulfillment, then there is apparently no reason for the existence of sickness and poverty. Surely no one desires any of those things. The first reason is because few people take the trouble to find out what the practical principles of the laws of life are. If they did, they would soon be convinced that there is no need for the disease and poverty we see around us. They would realize that visualization is a principle, not a fallacy. There are some people who have discovered that it is worthwhile to study this simple, yet absolutely infallible law, which will free them from slavery. However, the human race in general is unwilling to devote the time required to such studies. It is either too simple or too difficult. People create an image of their desire, with a slight understanding of visualization, and hold it for a day or two, although frequently they hold it for an hour or so. But if you insist on mentally seeing yourself surrounded by things and conditions as you want them to be, you will understand that the creative energy sends its plastic substance in the direction indicated by the tendency of your thoughts. Therein lies the advantage of holding your thought in the form of a mental image. The more enthusiasm and faith you can put into your image, the more quickly it will take visible form, and your enthusiasm will grow if you keep your desire a secret. The moment you tell any living soul about it, at that moment your power weakens. Your power, your magnetic attraction, is no longer as strong, and consequently, you cannot reach as far. The more perfectly guarded the secret is between your mind and your outer being, the more vitality you will give to your power of attraction. One tells one's problems to weaken them, to remove them from one's mind, and when a thought is revealed, its power dissipates. Talk about it with yourself, and even write it down, and then immediately destroy the paper. However, this doesn't mean you should strenuously try to force those in power to develop your image in the particular way you think it should. That method will soon exhaust you and prevent you from achieving your goal. A wealthy relative doesn't necessarily have to die, nor does someone have to lose their fortune on the street, for the $10,000 you're mentally imagining to materialize. One of the doormen of the building where I live overheard some visitors leaving my apartment discussing the act of mentally imagining wishes. The average wish was $550. He considered $5 to be about right for him and began visualizing it, having no idea where or how he was going to get it. Meanwhile, my parrot flew out the window, so I telephoned the men in the yard to catch it for me. One of them succeeded, but the parrot bit his finger. The doorman, who had his gloves on and had no fear that the animal would inflict a similar injury, grabbed it and went upstairs to bring it to me. I gave him 5 $1 bills for the service. His sudden reward surprised him. He excitedly told me that he had been visualizing exactly $5 simply because he had heard other people visualize. He was delighted at the unexpected realization of his mental image. All you have to do is create such a mental image of what you most desire, and hold it joyfully in place with your will, always conscious that the same infinite power that created the universe brought you into form for the purpose of enjoying itself in and through you. And since it is all life, love, light, power, peace, beauty, and joy, and is the only creative power in existence, the form it takes in and through you depends on the direction your thought has given it. In you, it is undifferentiated, waiting to take whatever direction is given it when it passes through the instrument it has created for the purpose of distributing itself. This power allows you to transfer your thoughts from one form to another. The power to change your mind is the individualized power that takes the initiative, giving direction to the fluid substance contained in every thought. Giving this highly sensitive plastic substance any form you desire through visualization is the simplest thing in the world. Anyone can do it with a little effort. When you are truly convinced that your mind is a center through which the plastic substance of everything that exists in your world involuntarily takes shape, the only reason your image does not always materialize is because you have introduced something that is antagonistic to the fundamental principle. Very often, this destructive element is caused by the frequency with which you change your images. After many such changes, you decide that, after all, what you want is your original desire. Having come to this conclusion, you begin to wonder why, being the first image, it has not materialized. The plastic substance with which you are mentally dealing is more sensitive than the most sensitive photographic film. If, while taking a photograph, you suddenly remember that you had already taken another photograph on that same plate, you cannot expect a perfect result in either image. On the other hand, you may have taken 2 photographs on the same plate without realizing it. When the plate is developed and the image appears, you don't condemn the principle of the photograph, nor are you perplexed, for you understand why your photograph has turned out so unsatisfactorily. You don't feel that it's impossible for you to obtain a good, clear image of the subject in question. You know you can do so simply by starting again from the beginning, putting in a new plate, and deciding to be more careful when taking the photograph the next time. When you follow these guidelines, you are sure to obtain a satisfactory result. If you act in the same way with your mental image, fulfilling your part with an equally confident state of mind, the result will be just as perfect. The laws of visualization are as infallible as the laws governing photography. In fact, photography is the result of visualizing. Again, your visualizing results and your desires may be imperfect or delayed because of a misuse of this power, due to the thought that the fulfillment of your desire depends on certain people or conditions. The creative principle is in no way dependent on any person, place, or thing. It has no past and knows no future. The law says that the creative principle of life is the universal here and the eternal now. It creates its own vehicles through which it operates. Therefore, the experiences of the past have nothing to do with your present image. So don't try to obtain your desire through a channel that may not be natural to it, even if it seems reasonable to you. Your feeling should be that the thing or consciousness you so desire is normal and natural, a part of you, a form of your evolution. If you can do this, there is no power that can prevent you from enjoying the realization of the image you are working with, or any other. Chapter 5. Beginner's Expressions. Hundreds of people have realized that visualizing is like having an Aladdin's lamp for anyone with a strong will. General Foch says he felt so indignant during the Franco-Prussian War in 1870 that he visualized himself leading a French army to victory against the Germans. He said he created this image, smoked a pipe, and waited. This is a result of the act of visualizing that we are all familiar with. Last winter, a famous actress wrote a long article in a major Sunday newspaper describing how she got rid of excess body fat and weight by constantly visualizing her figure as she wanted it to be. While I was lecturing in New York, I received an interesting letter from the wife of a doctor. She began by saying that she hoped I would never cease giving lectures on visualization, by which I made it possible for humanity to realize the wonderful fact that it possessed within itself the method for its liberation. Referring to her own experience, she told me that she was born on the east side of New York, in the poorest neighborhood. From her earliest childhood, she had harbored the dream of one day marrying a doctor. This dream had gradually become a fixed mental image. The first job she obtained was as a nurse in the family of a doctor. After leaving that family, she went to work for another doctor's family. Her employer's wife died, and eventually the doctor married her, the result of a long-held dream. After that, she and her husband conceived the idea of owning a farm in the southern United States. They formed a mental image of the idea and put their faith in its eventual fulfillment. The letter she sent me came from her farm in the south. The doctor's wife had written it while she was there. Her second mental image had seen the light of materialization. Every day, I receive many letters of a similar nature. The following is a case that appeared in the New York Herald in May 1921. Atlantic City, May 5th. She was an elderly woman, and today when she was brought before Judge Clarence Goldenberg in police court, she was so weak and tired that she could hardly stand. The judge asked the court guard what she was charged with. "Stealing a bottle of milk, Your Honor," replied the officer. "She took it from the porch of a small house in the center of town at daybreak this morning." "Why did you do that?" Judge Goldenberg asked the old woman. "I was hungry," she said. "I didn't have a cent and no way of getting anything to eat except by stealing. I thought nobody would mind if I took a bottle of milk." "What is your name?" asked the judge. "Weinberg," said the old woman, "Elizabeth Weinberg." Judge Goldenberg asked her a few questions about herself and then said, "Well, you're not very rich now, but you're not poor anymore. I've been looking for you for months. I have $500 that belongs to you, from the inheritance of a relative. I'm the executor of the will." Judge Goldenberg paid the woman's fine out of his own pocket and then brought her to his office, where he gave her her inheritance and sent a police officer to find her a place to stay. I later learned that this tiny woman had been wishing and mentally imagining $500, all the while ignoring how it would ever come to her. But she held on to her vision and strengthened it with her faith. In a recent issue of Good Housekeeping magazine, there was an article by Addington Bruce entitled, "Strengthening Your Mental Grit." It is extremely instructive and would benefit anyone who reads it. In part, he says, "The habit of setting aside a few moments each day to think about your work in a big, broad, and imaginative way is a vital necessity for you and a useful service to society." Huntington, the great railroad magnate, said he had taken hundreds of trips along the line before he began building the track that ran from coast to coast. They say he would sit for hours with a map of the United States in front of him and mentally travel from coast to coast, exactly as we do now in his realized mental picture. I could draw your attention to hundreds of similar instances. The best way to imagine what you want is both simple and enjoyable if you understand the principle behind it well enough to believe it. First and foremost, make sure you know what you really want. Then, narrow your desire down to that direction. Chapter 6. Suggestions for creating your mental image. Perhaps you long to feel like you've lived a life of purpose. You want to be content and happy, and you feel that with good health and a successful business, you could enjoy that state of mind. When you've finally decided once and for all what you want, then you begin to imagine yourself healthy, and that your business is as successful as you can naturally conceive. The best time to create and define your image is just before breakfast and before retiring for the night. Since you need to allow yourself a significant amount of time, you may need to get up earlier than usual. Go into a room where you won't be disturbed. Meditate for a few minutes on the practical operation of the law of visualization, and ask yourself, how did the things around me come into existence? How can I get in touch more quickly with the invisible supply? Someone thought that comfort would be best expressed and experienced if the person was sitting in a chair, not on the floor. At the beginning of meditation, the chair represented the desire to be comfortable. With this came the image of a kind of chair. This same principle applies to the hat and the clothes you wear. Enter deeply into this idea of the principle behind the thing. Establish it as a personal experience. Make it a reality for your consciousness. If you are conscientious in doing so, you will find yourself in the deep awareness that lies beneath the surface of your own thought power. Then, open a window, take about 10 deep breaths, and during this time, draw a large imaginary circle of light around yourself. As you inhale, keeping yourself in the center of this circle of light, visualize great rays of light emanating from the circle, penetrating your body at all points, centering in your solar plexus. Hold your breath for a few moments in this central light of your body, the solar plexus, and then exhale slowly. As you do this mentally, you should see imaginary rays or streams of light rising through your body, then descending and exiting through your feet. Mentally sprinkle your entire body with this imaginary light. When you have completed the breathing exercise, sit in a comfortable upright chair and mentally know that there is only one life, one substance, and that the life substance of the universe is finding pleasure in recognizing itself in you. Repeat a few affirmations of this type until you feel the truth and reality of the words you are speaking. Then begin to create your image. Whether your desire is to have a state of mind or to own something, small or large, start from the beginning. If you want a house, start by seeing yourself in the type of house you want. Walk through it, carefully looking at the rooms, the location of the windows, and other such details, as they will help you feel the reality of your concept. You could rearrange some of the furniture and look in some of the mirrors simply to see how healthy, wealthy, and happy you look. Go over your image over and over again until you feel it's real. Then, write it all down, exactly as you saw it, with the feeling, the best of the best is mine. There are no limits for me, for my mind is a divine operating center, and your image will become reality as surely as the sun will shine in your physical world. Chapter 7. Things to remember. When using the power of your thought to produce new circumstances, consider the following points. 1. Make sure you know what circumstances you wish to bring about. Then carefully consider what other outcomes the fulfillment of your desire will lead to. 2. By allowing your thought to recreate itself in a mental image, you are concentrating the creative spirit in that center, where all its forces are equally balanced. 3. Visualizing brings your objective mind into a state of balance that allows you to consciously direct the flow of spirit toward a clearly recognized end, and carefully guide your thought form so that it does not flow in the opposite direction. 4. You must always keep in mind that you are dealing with a wonderful potential energy, which is not yet differentiated into any particular mold, and which, through the action of your mind, can be differentiated into any mold you desire. Your image helps you keep your mind fixed on the fact that the influx of this creative energy is taking place. Furthermore, with your mental image, you are determining the direction you want the sensible creative power to take, and in doing so, The externalization of your image becomes a certainty. 5. Remember that when you are visualizing correctly, there is no energetic effort in your thoughts to keep your thought forms in place. Energetic effort defeats your purpose and suggests the awareness of an adverse force that must be fought against, and this creates adverse conditions for your image. 6. By maintaining your image in a joyful mood, you exclude all thoughts that would disperse its spiritual core. Since the law is creative in its action, your imagined desire will surely be realized. 7. The seventh and important point to remember when visualizing is that you are creating a mental image for the purpose of determining the quality you are giving to previously undifferentiated substance and energy, not arranging specific circumstances for its manifestation. That is the task of the creative power itself. It will construct its own forms of expression quite naturally if you allow it, and will save you a lot of unnecessary anxiety. What you really want is an expansion in a certain direction, whether of health, wealth, or anything else, and as long as you get it, as no doubt you will. If you hold your image with confidence, what does it matter whether it comes to you through a channel you thought you could count on, or through some other channel you were entirely unaware of? You are concentrating energy of a certain kind for a particular purpose. Keep this in mind, and let the specific details take care of themselves, and never mention your intention to anyone. Always remember that nature, from its clearly visible surface to its most mysterious depths, is an immense storehouse of light and goodness entirely dedicated to your individual use. Your conscious unity with the great whole is the secret of success, and when you have understood this, you will be able to enjoy possession of all or part of it at will, because through your recognition, you have made it yours and can do so increasingly. Never forget that all physical things, whether they are for you or against you, were a thought held before they became things. Thought as thought is neither good nor bad. It is creative action, and it always takes physical form. Therefore, the thoughts you dwell on become things you either possess or don't possess. Chapter 8. Why I dedicated myself to studying mental science. I have often been asked why I began to study mental science, and what the results of my research have been, not only in terms of my understanding of the principles, but also in terms of the application of that knowledge to my own life and experience. These questions are justifiable because someone attempting to play the role of messenger and teach psychological truths can only be effective and convincing if he or she has tested them in the laboratory of mental experience. This applies especially to me, for I was the only student of Thomas Troward, the greatest master of mental science today, whose teachings are based on the relationship between the individual mind and the universal creative mind, the life giver, and how that relationship can be invoked to ensure the expansion and fuller expression of individual life. What initially prompted me to study mental science was an overwhelming sense of loneliness. In every life, there are experiences of spiritual isolation, such as those that predominated in my life at that time. Despite the fact that I met with friends every day, surrounded by joy and happiness, I had the persistent feeling that I was alone in the world. I had been widowed 3 years before, and had been traveling from country to country, seeking serenity of mind. The circumstances and environment of my life were such that my friends considered me an unusually fortunate young woman. While acknowledging that I had suffered a great loss when my husband died, they knew it had left me well off, free to go anywhere I pleased, and with many friends. However, if my friends had been able to penetrate my innermost emotions, they would have found a profound feeling of emptiness and isolation. That feeling stimulated a restless spirit that drove me increasingly on a fruitless search outside for something I later realized could only be obtained within. I studied Christian Science, but it gave me no comfort, although I was fully aware of the great work being done by scientists, and I even had the pleasure and privilege of knowing Mrs. Eddy personally. But I found it impossible to accept the fundamental teachings of Christian Science and make a practical application of them. I was about to give up the search for happiness and resign myself to resuming my life of apparent fun, when a friend invited me to visit the great seer and teacher Abdu'l-Baha. After meeting with this wonderful man, my search for joy began to take a turn. He told me that he would travel the world searching for the truth, and that when he found it, he would speak about it. At the time, fulfilling that statement from this great seer seemed impossible, but it contained a measure of encouragement and, at least, indicated that my previous search had been going in the wrong direction. In a weak and uncertain way, I began to find joy within myself, because Abdu'l-Baha had given me to understand that I would find the truth. That was the important thing, and practically the only thing I remembered from our interview. A few days later, while visiting the office of a new thought practitioner, my attention was caught by a book on his desk entitled The Edinburgh Lectures on Mental Science by Thomas Troward. I was surprised to see that Troward was a retired judge from the Punjab, India. I bought the book, thinking I would read it that very afternoon. Many have attempted to do the same, but have found, as I did, that the book must be studied to be understood, and hundreds have decided, as I did, to give it their full attention. After finding this book, which was a treasure, I went into the country for a few days, and while there, I studied the volume as thoroughly as I could. I found it extremely difficult, and decided to purchase another book by Troward, hoping that its study would not require so much effort. Upon inquiring, I was told that the next volume, Dore's Lectures, was much simpler and was the better of the two books. It took me weeks and months before I had even a vague idea of the meaning of Dore's first chapter, which was entitled Getting into the Spirit of It. By this I mean that it took me months to get into the spirit of what I was reading, but in the meantime, a paragraph on page 26 caught my attention because it seemed to me to be the greatest thing I had ever read. I memorized it and strove with all my soul to enter into the spirit of Troward's words. The paragraph reads, "My mind is a center of divine operation. Divine operation is always for expansion and fuller expression, and this means the production of something beyond what has existed before, something entirely new, not included in previous experience, though growing out of it by an orderly sequence of growth. Therefore, since the divine cannot change its inherent nature, it must operate in the same way with me, consequently, in my own special world, of which I am the center. It will move forward to produce new conditions, always in advance of any that have previously existed." It took an effort on my part to memorize this paragraph, but in striving toward this end, the words seemed to carry with them a certain encouragement. Each repetition of the paragraph made it easier for me to enter into its spirit. The words expressed exactly what I had been seeking. My one desire was serenity of mind. I found it comforting to believe that the divine operation in me could expand to fuller expression and produce more and more joy, indeed a serenity of mind and a degree of contentment greater than I had ever known. The paragraph inspired in me even more a deep interest to feel that the spark of life within me could bring something entirely new into my life. I had no desire to blot out my past experiences, but to continue from them would bring something new that would transcend anything I had ever experienced before. Meditation on these statements brought with it a certain feeling of joy. How wonderful it would be if I could sincerely accept and believe, without a shadow of a doubt, that Troward's statement was true. Certainly the divine could not change its inherent nature, and since the divine life is at work in me, I must be divinely inhabited, and the divine in me must operate just as it operates on the universal plane. This meant that my entire world of circumstances, friends, and conditions would eventually become a world of joy and enjoyment, of which I am the center. All this would occur as soon as I was able to control my mind, and thus provide a concrete center around which the divine energies could play. It was certainly worth a try. If Troward had found this truth, why couldn't I? The thought kept me focused on my task. Later, I decided to study with the man who had made and delivered such a marvelous statement to the world. He had shaken me out of my despondent state. The immediate difficulty was that I needed more money. Chapter 9. How I attracted $20,000. In the experimental laboratory where my newly revealed relationship to divine operation was to be tested, the first problem was financial. My income was, as stipulated, sufficient to cover my daily needs, but it did not seem sufficient to allow me to travel comfortably to England, where Troward lived, and remain there for an indefinite period to study with so great a teacher as he must have been. So, before finding out whether Troward accepted students, or, if he did, whether I met the requirements, I began to use the paragraph I had memorized. Every day, in fact, practically at all hours, the words were in my mind. My mind is a center of divine operation, and divine operation means expansion into something better than has ever existed before. I had read something about the law of attraction in the book of the Edinburgh Lectures, and in the chapter on causes and conditions, I had gained a vague idea of what visualizing was all about. So, every night before going to sleep, I created a mental image of the $20,000 I desired. Every night in my bedroom, I would count out $20,000 bills, and then, with the idea of impressing my mind more emphatically that those $20,000 were for going to England and studying with Troward, I would write down what I imagined. I pictured myself buying a steamboat ticket, walking back and forth on the deck of the boat from New York to London, and finally, I pictured myself being accepted as Troward's student. This process was repeated every morning and every night, always impressing more and more fully upon my mind Troward's affirmation I had memorized. My mind is a center of divine operation. I endeavored to keep this affirmation in the back of my consciousness at all times, without any thought of how I might get the money. Probably the reason there was no thought of the ways in which the money might come to me was because I could not imagine where the $20,000 could come from. So, I simply held my thoughts steady, and let the power of attraction find its own ways and means. One day as I was walking down the street, doing my deep breathing exercises, a thought came to me. My mind is, without a doubt, a center of divine operation. God fills all space, so God must be in my mind as well. If I want this money to study with Troward so I can know the truth of life, then both the money and the truth must be mine, even though I am not yet able to feel or see the physical manifestations of either, I declared. They must be mine. While these reflections were taking place in my mind, a thought seemed to come from within me. I am all substance that exists. Then from another channel of my brain the answer seemed to come. Of course it is. Everything must have its beginning in the mind. The idea, must be the only original substance that exists, and that means money as well as everything else. My mind accepted this idea, and immediately all tension in mind and body disappeared. I had a feeling of absolute certainty that I was in touch with all the power life has to give. All thoughts of money, the teacher, or even my own personality vanished in the great current of joy that coursed through my entire being. I walked on as this feeling of joy steadily increased and expanded, until everything around me seemed to glow with a blazing light. Every person I passed was as illuminated as I was. All consciousness of personality was gone, and in its place came this stupendous, almost overwhelming feeling of joy and contentment. That night, when I developed my image of the $20,000, it was in a completely different light. On previous occasions, while creating my mental image, I had felt something awakening within me. This time there was no sense of effort. I simply counted the $20,000. Then, quite unexpectedly, from a source I was not aware of at the time, a possible path seemed to open up through which the money could come to me. At first it was with great effort not to become excited. It seemed so wonderful, so glorious to be in touch with the source of supply. But had not Troward warned his readers to keep all excitement out of their minds when they first realized their connection with the infinite supply, and to treat this fact as the perfectly natural result of our petition? This was even more difficult for me than maintaining the thought that I am all substance that exists. I am the principle of all form, visible or invisible. As soon as a circumstance presented itself that indicated the direction from which the $20,000 might appear, I not only made a supreme effort to calmly contemplate the indicated direction as the first sprouting of the seed I had absolutely sown, but I left no stone unturned in pursuing that direction, doing my part. Whenever I did so, one circumstance seemed to lead naturally to another, until, step by step, I obtained my desired $20,000. My greatest effort was to keep my mind balanced and free from excitement. The first concrete fruit of my study of mental science, as explained in Troward's book, had come because I had painstakingly followed the methods he described. In this explanation, therefore, the best gift I can offer the reader is to quote Troward's book, The Edinburgh Lectures on Mental Science, from which a full idea of the line of action I was striving to pursue may be obtained. In the chapter on causes and conditions he says, "To obtain good results, we must rightly understand our relation to the great impersonal power we are utilizing. It is intelligent, and we are intelligent, and the two intelligences must cooperate. When N was not act irrationally toward the law, expecting it to do for us what it can only do through us. Therefore, we must use our intelligence with the knowledge that it is acting as an instrument of a greater intelligence, and since we have this knowledge, we can and should cease all anxiety regarding the final outcome. In practice, we must first form the ideal concept of our goal, with the clear intention of impressing it upon the universal mind. This is the thought that lifts such thinking out of the region of mere casual chimeras, and then affirm that our knowledge of the law is sufficient grounds for the serene expectation of obtaining the corresponding result, and that, therefore, all the necessary conditions will present themselves to us in due order. We can then go about the business of our daily lives with the calm assurance that the initial conditions are already there, or will soon be within sight. If we do not see them immediately, we must be content with the knowledge that the spiritual prototype already exists, and wait until some circumstance begins to appear that points in the desired direction. See, it may be a very unimportant circumstance, but it is the direction, not the magnitude, that we must take into account. As soon as we see it, we should regard it as the first sprouting of the seed sown in the absolute, and act calmly, without excitement, whatever the circumstances demand. Then, later on, we will see that this way of acting will lead us to another circumstance, in the same direction, until we find that we are being carried step by step to the realization of our objective. Thus, the understanding of the great principle of the law of supply through continual experience will lead us more and more completely away from our anxious thoughts and painful strivings, and into a new world in which the useful employment of all our powers, whether mental or physical, will be but an unfolding of our individuality in accordance with its own nature, and therefore a perpetual source of health and happiness, surely a sufficient incentive to a close study of the laws governing the relation of the individual to the universal mind. Then, as now, it seemed to me that that quote described the very core of the method and approach necessary to contact infinite supply. At least this quote, like the earlier one, "My mind is the center of divine operation," and so on, constituted the only apparent means of attracting the $20,000 to me. My continued effort to enter into the spirit of these affirmations and to attract the sum I needed lasted approximately 6 weeks. At the end of that period, I had the required $20,000 in my bank account. I could make this into a long story, giving all the details, but the facts, as I have narrated them, will give you a clear idea of the magnetic condition of my mind as the $20,000 found their way to me. Chapter 10. How I became the sole personal student of the greatest mental scientist living today. As soon as I had the idea of studying with Troward, I asked a friend of mine to write to him on my behalf, because I felt that perhaps he could express my desire better, or do so in more persuasive terms than I could employ. Not one letter written by my friend received a single reply. This was so discouraging that I might have given up the idea of becoming Troward's student altogether, but I was prevented from doing so by the experience I had that day on the street, when my whole world was lightened, and I remembered the promise, "What things ye desire, believe that ye have received them, and ye shall receive them." With this experience in mind, I arranged my trip to England, despite the fact that my letters had apparently been ignored. However, we wrote again, and finally received a very formal but extremely positive reply. Troward did not accept students. He didn't have time to spare for a student. Despite this final decision, I refused to be discouraged, thanks to the memory of the day the light came to me and the thought, "I am all substance that exists." Apparently, I could relive that experience at will, and with it always came a surge of courage and renewed energy. We traveled to London and from there telegraphed Troward, requesting an interview. The telegram was immediately answered, and in it he set a date when he would be able to see us. At that time, Troward was living at Ruan Manor, a small remote place in the south of England, about 20 miles from the railway station. We couldn't find it on a map, and with great difficulty, the Cook's touring agency in London located the place for us. There was very little doubt in my mind about what Troward would tell me during the interview. I had always maintained the feeling that the truth was mine, and that it would grow and expand in my consciousness until peace and contentment were outward, as well as inward, manifestations of my individual life. We arrived at the house during a tremendous thunderstorm and were cordially received by Troward himself, who, to my surprise, looked more French than English. I later learned that he was of Huguenot descent. He was a man of medium height, with a rather large head, a large nose, and eyes that danced clearly with joy. When he had introduced us to all the other members of his family and given us a cup of hot tea, we were invited into the living room, where Troward spoke to us very freely about everything except my proposed studies. It seemed practically impossible to draw him toward that subject. However, just before leaving, I boldly asked him, "Why don't you reconsider your decision to accept a personal pupil? I am so desirous of studying with you," to which he replied with the utmost indifference that he did not feel he could spare the time that would be required for personal training, but that he would be glad to give me the names of 2 or 3 books which he considered would be not only interesting to me, but also instructive. He said that he was much flattered and gratified by the fact that I had come all the way from the United States to study with him, and on our way out, as we walked through his garden to the car, he behaved in a much less indifferent manner. A feeling of sympathy seemed to touch his heart, and he turned to me, making the following remark, "You could write to me if you like. When you arrive in Paris, and perhaps in the autumn, if I have time, we could arrange something, though I don't think it is possible now." I wasted no time in responding to his kind invitation to write to him. All my letters were answered promptly and politely, but there was never a word of encouragement regarding my proposed studies. Finally, about 2 months later, a letter arrived containing the question, "What do you think is the meaning of this verse in Revelation chapter 21? Tenet 16. The city is a square, and its length is equal to its width. He measured the city with the measure, 2,220 kilometers. Its length and its width and its height are equal." Instinctively, I knew that my opportunity to study with Troward depended on giving him the correct answer to that question. The definition of the verse seemed utterly beyond my reach. Naturally, answers flooded my mind, but I knew intuitively that none of them were correct. Lawyers, doctors, priests, nuns, and clergy from all over the world received letters from me containing this question. Later, the answers began to trickle in, but my intuition told me none of them were correct. Meanwhile, I struggled to find the answer on my own, but I couldn't seem to find one. I memorized the verse for the purpose of meditating on it. I began a search in Paris for the texts Troward had recommended, and after 2 or 3 days of searching, We crossed the Seine to the Ile de Chie to visit some old bookstores there. The books were out of print, and those were the best places to find them. Finally, we happened upon a small shop that carried them. They were the last copies the man had, and their price was consequently high. While I was complaining to the clerk, my eye fell upon the work of an astrologer. I picked it up, laughing, and asked, "Do you think the professor would read my horoscope?" The man looked horrified at my suggestion and replied, "Oh no, madame, that's one of the greatest astrologers in France. He doesn't read horoscopes." Despite his reply, a persistent urge arose within me to go see this man. The friend who had accompanied me on my book hunt demurred and tried her best to dissuade me from seeing the famous astrologer, but I insisted, and she accompanied me. When we arrived at his office, I felt it somewhat embarrassing to ask him to read my horoscope. However, there was nothing I could do except pose my question. Reluctantly, the professor invited us into his paper-strewn study, and, equally reluctantly and impatiently, asked us to sit down. Very politely and coldly, he told me that he did not read horoscopes. His entire demeanor spoke more clearly than words that he wished us to leave. My friend stood up. I didn't know what else to do, for I felt I wasn't quite ready to leave yet. My intuition seemed to tell me that there was something to be gained from this. I couldn't define exactly what it was, so, to my friend's annoyance, I remained silent for some moments when, suddenly, one of the professor's enormous Persian cats jumped into my lap. "Get down, Jack!" cried the professor. He seemed to be wondering, what does this mean? Then, with greater interest than he had shown in me up to that moment, he said with a smile, "I have never seen that cat approach a stranger before, madame. My cat is pleading for you. Now I too feel an interest in your horoscope. So if you will give me the date, I shall have the pleasure of putting it in writing for you." I felt a great sense of happiness when he made this remark, and he concluded by saying, "I don't think you really care about your horoscope." The truth of that statement shocked me, because I didn't care about my horoscope, and I couldn't tell her why I was asking her to do it. "However," she said, "may I see you next Saturday afternoon to ask for your information?" On Saturday afternoon, at the appointed time, the professor arrived. I was handing him the sheet of paper with all the details of my birth, etc., when it occurred to me to ask him for the answer to the question about verse 16 of chapter 21 of the Apocalypse. My thought instantly had an effect, and I found myself asking the man what he thought that verse meant. Without pausing to think, he immediately retorted, "It means that the city signifies truth, and truth is not invertible. Every side from which one approaches it is exactly the same." Intuitively and without hesitation, I recognized that answer as the true one, and my joy was boundless, for I was certain that, possessing that correct answer, Troward would accept me as a disciple in the fall. As the great astrologer was leaving, I told him all about my desire to study with Troward, who had come from New York expressly for that purpose, apparently in vain until he had given me the answer to that question, which was a test. He was very interested, and asked me several questions about Troward. When I asked him to please send me the bill, he smilingly replied, "Let me know if the great Troward will accept you as his disciple," and bade me good afternoon. I hurried to my room to send a telegram to Troward, giving him the answer to the question on verse 16 of chapter 21 of Revelation. I received an immediate reply from Troward saying, "Your answer is correct. I am beginning a course of lectures on the Great Pyramid in London. If you wish to attend them, and if, later on, you still wish to study with me, I think we can arrange that." Upon receiving this reply, I immediately made preparations to travel from Paris to London. I attended all the lectures and received a great deal of instruction from them, and soon afterward we began arrangements for my study with Troward. 2 days before I left for Cornwall, I received the following letter from Troward, clearly outlining the line of study he was giving me. 31 Stanwick Road, W. Kensington, England. November 8, 1912. Querida Sra. Behrend, I think it's best if I write you a few lines about your proposal to study with me, as I would be terribly sorry if I misunderstood something and were disappointed as a result. I have been studying the subject for several years and have a general understanding of the main features of most of the subjects that unfortunately occupy the attention in many circles these days, such as Theosophy, Tarot, Kabbalah, and the like, and I have no hesitation in saying that in my judgment, all types and descriptions of so-called occult studies are directly opposed to the real, life-giving truth, and therefore you should not expect my teachings to go in those directions. We hear a lot about initiation these days, but believe me, the more you try to become an initiate, the more you will fail to live life. I speak from several years of careful study and reflection when I say that the Bible and its revelation of Christ is the only thing truly worth studying. That is a sufficiently broad subject in every conscience, for it encompasses our external life and our daily affairs, as well as the internal sources of our life and everything we can, in general terms, conceive of life in the invisible after we detach ourselves from the body at death. You have expressed a high degree of confidence in my teachings, and if your confidence is such that, as you say, you wish to place yourself completely under my guidance, I cannot but accept it as a very serious responsibility, and I shall have to ask you to show that confidence by refusing to examine the so-called mysteries, for I now forbid you to do so. I am speaking from experience, but the result will be that many of my teachings will seem very simple, perhaps somewhat dogmatic, and you will say that you have heard much of it before. Faith in God, prayer and worship bring us closer to the Father through Christ. All of this will, in some sense, be familiar to you, and all I can hope to do is perhaps shed a little more light on these subjects, so that they may be for you not merely traditional words, but also living realities. I've been so explicit because I don't want you to be disappointed, and I should also say that our so-called course of study will be just a few friendly conversations on occasions that suit us, either for you to come to our house or I to yours, whichever is more convenient at the time. I will also lend you some books that will help you, but they are very few and are not hidden in any way. Now, if all this is in keeping with your ideas, I'm sure we'll be delighted to see you at Ruan Manor, and you'll find that the residents here, though few, are very friendly, and the neighborhood is very pretty. But if, on the other hand, you feel you need some other source of learning, feel free to say so, but you will never find any substitute for Christ. I trust you won't mind me writing to you like this, but I don't want you to come all the way to Cornwall and then be disappointed. With warm regards, cordially greeting you. Signed, T. Troward. In my opinion, this copy of Troward's letter is the most magnificent thing I can give you. Chapter 11. How to translate the power of your words into action. In all your words is the germ of power that expands and projects in the direction your word indicates, and eventually develops into a physical expression. For example, if you wish to establish joy in your consciousness, simply repeat the word joy secretly, persistently, and emphatically. The germ of joy will begin to expand and project until your entire being is filled with joy. This is not a mere illusion, but a truth. Once you experience this power, you will demonstrate daily that these facts have not been fabricated to fit a theory, but that the theory has been created through careful observation of reality. Everyone knows that joy comes from within. Another person can cause you to be joyful, but no one can be joyful for you. Joy is a state of consciousness, and consciousness, says Troward, is mental. The mental faculties always function because of something that stimulates them, and that stimulus can come from outside, through the external senses, or from within, through the awareness of something not perceptible on the physical plane. Recognizing this inner source of stimulation allows you to bring into your consciousness any state you desire. Once something seems normal to you, it is surely yours, by the law of growth and attraction. Just as the knowledge of addition is yours once you have the conscious use of numbers. This method of repeating the word makes the word in all its unlimited meaning, yours, because words are the embodiment of thoughts, and thought is creative. It is neither good nor bad, it is simply creative. This is why faith builds and fear destroys. If you only believe all things are possible for you, it is faith that gives you mastery over every adverse circumstance or condition. It is your word of faith that sets you free, not faith in any specific thing or act, but simple faith in your best self in every way. It is this ever-present creative power within the heart of the word that makes your health, your serenity of mind, and your financial situation a reproduction of your most habitual thoughts. Try to believe and understand this, and you will discover that you are the master of every adverse circumstance or condition, a prince of power. Chapter 12. How to increase your faith. But you ask, how can I speak of the word faith when I have little or no faith? Every living being has faith in something or someone. It is the quality of creative energy in the positive thought of faith that gives it vitality, not the form it takes. Even intense fear is alive because of faith. You are afraid of smallpox because you believe it is possible for you to contract it. You fear poverty and loneliness because you believe they are possible for you. It is your habitual thought tendency that reappears in your mind, your body, and your affairs, not the occasional thought about some specific direction or desire. It is the faith that understands that every creation was born in the womb of words and thought that gives you dominion over all things, including your lower self. And this feeling of faith increases and intensifies when we observe what it does. This observation is the observation of your state of consciousness when you did it, not when you hoped to do it but feared it was too good to be true. How did you feel on that occasion, when you simply had to get into a better state of mind and did, or when you wanted to have a certain thing and got it? Relive those experiences over and over again mentally, until you truly feel that you are in touch with the self that knows and understands, and the best of the best is yours. Chapter 13. The Reward of Growing Faith. Since you have expanded your faith in the faith and laws of the universe that know no failure, your faith in the best within you, the TI life principle has led you to consciously realize that you are not a victim of the universe, but a part of it. Consequently, within you is that which is capable of establishing conscious contact with the universal principle of law and power, and enables you to pressure all the particular laws of nature, whether seen or unseen, to serve your particular demand or desire. Thus, you discover that you are a master, not a slave, in any situation. Troward tells us that this mastery must be attained through knowledge, and the only knowledge that will provide this end in all its immeasurable vastness is the knowledge of the personal element in the universal spirit and its reciprocity in our own personality. In other words, the words you think, the personality you feel yourself to be, are all miniature reproductions of either a specialized God or a universal spirit. All your thought words were word forms of God before they were yours. The words you use are the instruments, the channels through which creative energy takes form. Naturally, this sensible creative power can only be reproduced according to the instrument through which it passes. All disappointments and failures are the result of trying to think one thing and produce another. That is as impossible as it would be to use an electric fan to illuminate, or to make water flow in a straight line through a bent pipe. Water must take the form of the pipe through which it flows. Even more faithfully, this sensitive invisible fluid substance must externally reproduce the form of the thought word through which it passes. This is the law of its nature, therefore, it logically follows that as a man thinketh, so is he. Hence, when your thought or word form is in correspondence with the eternal constructive forward movement of universal law, then your mind is the mirror in which the infinite power and intelligence of the universe are reproduced, and your individual life becomes one of harmony. Chapter 14. How to make nature respond to you. It should be continually kept in mind that there is an intelligence and a power within all nature and all space that is always creative, and infinitely sensitive and responsive. The responsiveness of its nature is twofold. It is both creative and sensitive to suggestion. Once human understanding has grasped this most important fact, it realizes the simplicity of the law of life. All you need to realize is that your mind is a center of divine operation and, consequently, has within it that which accepts suggestions. Expect life to respond to your call, and you will find suggestions that tend toward the fulfillment of your desire coming to you, not only from other people but also from flowers, grass, trees, and rocks, and that will enable you to realize your most cherished desire if you act upon it with confidence on this physical plane. Faith without words is dead, but faith with works sets you completely free. Chapter 15. Faith with Works. What it has achieved. It is said of Tyson, the great Australian millionaire, that the suggestion "make the desert land of Australia blossom like a rose" came to him from an unassuming little Australian violet while he was working as a gardener for about 3 shillings a day. He used to find these friendly little violets growing in certain parts of the forests, and something about the flower touched Tyson's mind, and he would sit on the edge of his bunk at night and wonder how flowers and plant life might be given a chance to express themselves in the desert lands of Australia. Tyson was undoubtedly aware that it would take a long time to save the money necessary to put irrigation dikes on the desert lands. But in his thoughts and feelings he was certain that it could be done, and if it could be done, he could do it. If there was a power within him that was capable of capturing the idea, then there must be a responding power in the idea itself that could be turned into practical, physical manifestation. Determinedly, Tyson put aside all questions about the specific ways and means that would be employed to bring his desire to physical manifestation, and simply kept his thoughts focused on the idea of building fences and seeing flowers and grass where none existed. Since the responsiveness of the creative reproductive power is not limited to any local state of mind, Tyson's habitual meditation and mental imagery left his ideas free to wander into infinity and attract other ideas of a similar nature. Therefore, he did not need to wait to see his ideas and desires realized until he had saved enough money from his 3 shillings a day to irrigate the land, because his ideas found other ideas in the financial world that harmonized in sympathy with them, and the doors of finance quickly opened. All charitable institutions are based on the principle of life's responsiveness. If this were not true, no one would bother to give simply because another was in need. The law of supply and demand, cause and effect, can never be broken. Ideas attract similar ideas. Sometimes they come from a flower, a book, or the invisible. You are sitting or walking, absorbed in an idea that is not entirely complete as to the ways and means of realizing it, and then another idea appears. No one knows where it came from, and is received by your idea, attracting one to the other, and so on until your desires become physical realities. Perhaps you feel the need for an improvement in your finances and wonder how such an increase can happen, when suddenly, from within, the idea seems to come to you that everything originates in thought, even money, and your thoughts change course. You simply cling to the declaration or affirmation that the best and everything that exists is yours. Since you are able to capture ideas of the infinite through the instrument of your intuition, let your mind rest on that thought, knowing full well that it will respond to itself. Your inhibition of the thought of doubt and the feeling of anxiety allows reassuring ideas to settle in and attract ideas of "I can" and "I will achieve," which gradually become the physical form of the desire in the mind. In the conscious use of universal power to reproduce your desires in physical form, 3 facts should be kept in mind. First, all space is filled with creative power. Second, this creative power is sensitive to suggestion. Third, it can only work with deductive methods. As Troward tells us, this last point is extremely important, since it implies that the action of the ever-present creative power is not limited in the least by what precedes. It works in accordance with the essence of the spirit of the principle. In other words, This universal power takes its creative direction from the words you give it. When a human being becomes aware of this great truth, it becomes paramount in his entire consideration of the character with which this sensitive reproductive power is invested. It is the unalterable law of this creative life principle, that as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. If you realize the truth that the only creative power can be for you only what you feel and think it is, it will be willing and prepared to comply with your demands. Troward says, if you think your thought is powerful, then your thought is powerful. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he is the law of life, and creative power cannot change this law. Just as an ordinary mirror cannot reflect back to you an image other than the object you hold up to it. As you think, so you are, does not mean as you tell people you think, or as you would like the world to believe you think. It refers to your innermost thoughts, that place only you know. No one can know the Father except the Son, and no one can know the Son except the Father. Only the Spirit of life, creator and reproducer, knows what you think, until your thoughts become physical realities and manifest in your body, your brain, or your affairs. Then everyone you come into contact with can know, because the Father, the intelligent creative energy who listens in secret, hears your most secret thoughts, rewards you openly, and reproduces your thoughts in physical form. The phrase "as you think, you know that you shall become" should be kept in the back of your mind constantly. That is watching and praying without ceasing, even when you don't feel strong enough to pray physically. Chapter 16. Suggestions on how to pray or ask, believing that you have already received. Scientific thinking. Positive thinking. Suggestions for practical application. Try through careful, positive and enthusiastic but not exhausting thinking to realize that the indescribable, invisible substance of life fills all space, and that its nature is an intelligent, plastic and subjective substance. 5 in the morning is the best time to enter this type of meditation. If you go to bed early every night for a month, before falling asleep, and firmly impress upon your subjective mind the affirmation, "My Father is the ruler of the entire world and is expressing his commanding power through me," you will discover that the substance of life takes shape in the molds of your thoughts. Don't accept the above suggestion simply because it's been given to you. Think it over again carefully until it becomes imprinted on your subconscious mind in a comprehensible form. Get up every morning at 5, as suggested above. Sit in a straight-back chair in a quiet room, and think the affirmation from the previous night. You will become aware of your magnificent power, and be able to put it into practice, realizing, at least to some extent, that your mind is truly the center through which all creative energy and power are taking shape. Scientific prayer. The principle underlying scientific prayer. When praying to change a condition, whether physical, mental, or economic, for yourself or someone else, keep in mind that the fundamental need for prayer to be answered is to understand the following scientific statement. Then ask, believing that you have received, and you will receive. This is not as difficult as it appears on the surface, once you realize that everything originates in the mind and that you already possess what you seek outside. No one can think a thought in the future. Your thought of something constitutes its origin. Therefore, the thought form of the thing is already yours as soon as you think. Your continued recognition of this possession of thought causes the thought to concentrate, condense, and project itself into physical form. Getting rich through creation. The recognition or idea of new forces of wealth is the highest aspiration you can hold in your heart, for it presupposes and implies the promotion of all noble goals. Things to remember about praying for yourself or someone else. Remember that what you call treatment or prayer is not, in any sense, hypnotism. You should never attempt to take possession of another person's mind. Remember that you should never intend to make yourself believe something you know is not true. You are simply thinking inwardly about God or the first cause, with the understanding that, if something is true, There's a way it's true throughout the universe. Remember that the power of thought operates on absolutely scientific principles. These principles are expressed in the language of affirmation. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. This statement contains great wisdom, but it requires recognition and careful application by the individual to put it to practical use. Remember that your freedom to choose what you will think, exactly what thought you will affirm and declare, is a gift from God. It shows that the first cause has endowed each person with the power and ability to bring into their personal environment whatever they choose. Cause and effect in relation to achieving. If you plant an acorn, you get an oak tree. If you plant a grain of corn, you reap a stalk and many grains of corn. You always obtain the manifestation of what you affirm and declare, consciously or unconsciously, what you habitually say and hope for. In other words, what you sow. Therefore plant seeds of I am, I must, I can, I will realize that because you are, you must, because you must, you can, because you can, you do it. The manifestation of this truth, even in a small degree, gives you the indisputable understanding that dominion is your right. You are an heir to the first cause, endowed with all its power. God has given you everything. Everything is yours, and you know that all you have to do is reach out your mental hand and take it. This formula can serve as a design for shaping your own prayer or affirmation to God for the benefit of another person, or yourself. If it's for someone you want to help, say their first name, and then completely remove their personality from your consciousness. Intensify your thinking by meditating on the fact that there is something within you that finds the way, that is the truth and the life. You are affirming this fact, convinced that since you are thinking this, it is already yours. Having elevated your feeling to the central idea of this meditation, examine your own consciousness to see if there is anything other than God. If there is any feeling of fear, worry, malice, envy, hatred, or jealousy, return to your meditation to clear your thoughts by affirming that God's love and purity fill all space, including your heart and soul. Reconcile your thoughts with the love of God, always remembering that you are made in the image and likeness of love. Keep this cleansing thought in your mind until you feel that you have completely freed your consciousness of all thoughts and feelings other than those of love and unity with all humanity. Then, if denials don't bother you, deny everything other than your desired manifestation. Once this is achieved, you practically cover your denial with the affirmative thought that you are made in the image and likeness of God, and that your desire has already been realized in its first spiritual or thought form. Choose the sentence. Prayer as a method of thought is a deliberate use of the law that gives you the power to master all things that tend to impede, in any way, your perfect freedom. You have been given life so that you may enjoy it ever more fully. The continual recognition of this truth makes you a prince of power. You recognize, accept, and use this power as the son of a king, and therefore, dominion is your birthright. So, when you feel the light of this great truth flooding your consciousness, open the floodgates of your soul by sincerely praising the realization that the Creator and His creation are one. Also, that the Creator is continually creating through His creation. End your treatment with the happy assurance that the prayer you have uttered is not a form of supplication, but a regular, ongoing affirmation that the Creator of all creation is acting specifically through you. Therefore, the work must be done perfectly. Your mind is a center of divine operation. Tips for application and practice. For every 5 minutes spent reading and studying the theories of mental science, spend 15 minutes using and applying the knowledge you have acquired. 1. Spend 1 minute every 24 hours consciously thinking about the specification that must be observed for your prayers to be answered. 2. Practice firmly recognizing the possession of desirable thoughts for 2 15-minute periods each day. Not only should you time each period to see how long you can hold a given idea in your mental vision, but you should also keep a written record of how vivid the mental images you experience are. Remember that your mental senses are as varied as your physical senses and can be trained. 3. Dedicate 5 minutes every day, between noon and 1 in the afternoon, to the mental. Search for sources of wealth. Chapter 17. Things you should remember. Remember that the greatest mental scientist the world has ever known, Jesus Christ the man, said that all things are possible for you. He also said, "The things I do, you can do." Was he telling the truth? Jesus didn't claim to be more divine than you. He declared that the entire human race was a child of God. By birth, he was no exception to this rule. The power he possessed was developed through his personal effort. He said you could do the same, if only you believed in yourself. A great idea is worthless if it isn't accompanied by physical action. God gives the idea, the human being develops it on the physical plane. The only thing truly worthwhile is contentment. Self-mastery alone can bring it. Soul and body are one. The joy of the mind is the joy of the soul, and the joy of the soul means the joy of the body. If you desire health, observe your thoughts, not only about your physical being, but also your thoughts about all things and all people. With your will, make them agree with your desire, and act outwardly in accordance with your thoughts. You will soon realize that you have been given all power over your thoughts and your circumstances. You believe in God. Believe in yourself as the physical instrument through which God acts. Absolute dominion is yours when you have sufficient self-control to conquer the negative tendencies of thoughts and actions. Ask yourself daily, what is the purpose of the power that brought me here? How can I work purposefully for life and freedom within me? Having decided on these matters, dedicate yourself to carrying them out every hour. You are a law unto yourself. If you have a tendency to overindulge in something, eating, drinking, or blaming circumstances for your misfortunes, conquer that tendency with the inner conviction that all power lies within you. Eat less, drink less, blame circumstances less, and gradually, the best of the best will take the place that seemed to be occupied by the worst. Always remember that all things are yours to use as you wish. You can do it if you want, and if you want, you do it. God the Father blesses you with all that He has to give. Make good use of it. The reason you were so successful when you began your studies and demonstrations in mental science is that your joy and enthusiasm at the simple discovery of inner power was greater than you were able to put into your understanding later. With increasing understanding, put in more and more joy and enthusiasm, and the results will be commensurate. Remember to like and subscribe, and let the sound of the bell guide you back.